The History of Poland, Episode 13, Bolesław II's Domestic Affairs and Deposition. Hello and welcome back. I know it's been a while, my humblest apologies. Fortunately, it looks like there's going to be plenty of time to work on the podcast in the coming weeks and months, so who knows, maybe we'll hit that release a new episode every week stride I've been aiming for. You may not have realized I was aiming for that, but that is the goal. Anyway, to get everyone back up to speed, last time we talked about the investiture controversy and the larger struggles for power that were going on in Europe at the time of Bolesław the Bold's reign. Popes, emperors, etc. You remember all that good stuff. And before that, we talked about Bolesław's foreign invasions, his intervening in the Holy Roman Empire, about his incursions in Hungary, Bohemia, and Russia, and his generally aggressive foreign policy. One thing we haven't talked about at length, however, was how Bolesław managed the domestic affairs of his kingdom. This is the question we'll turn to today. Let's start with his lasting accomplishments. These are the infrastructure projects, some of which can still be seen in Poland today, some 900 years later. Now, today, if you say the government is undertaking to build some infrastructure projects, that typically means improving the electric grid, building water facilities, paving new roads, constructing new bridges, that sort of thing. Well, Poland had none of those things, except roads, though of course they weren't like our roads, he said in the understatement of the year. Anyway, when we say infrastructure projects, we mean something else entirely when referring to this time period. Specifically, religious infrastructure projects. As we know, Poland had most of its Christian buildings destroyed during the pagan reaction, leaving the state with a lack of religious institutions. Very few churches, cathedrals, monasteries, abbeys, and all the rest that goes into running a kingdom in the Middle Ages. That's unfortunate, since, as we all know, if there's one thing that both Catholic rulers and Catholic religious officials like, it's large, impressive buildings. Nothing says tax money well spent like gigantic stone buildings that will serve as a crypt for the people who built it. So, Bolesław, being the wise and noble king that he was, decided to construct new buildings for the benefit of the church and to increase his kingdom's standing on the European stage. There are few we know about, most notably the monasteries in Mcgill, Lubin, and Wrocław. They're still there today and were part of a larger effort by Bolesław to re-establish the institutions of Polish society that had been devastated in the pagan reaction. He also re-established the Archdiocese of Gniezno, which, as you'll recall, was not treated especially well when some Bohemian soldiers pillaged it. Beyond these buildings, there's also evidence that Bolesław worked to build roads and to generally bulk up the built environment in Poland. Obviously, there aren't planning offices that we can go visit and pull up the records, but it seems as though construction and cultural rehabilitation were big parts of Bolesław's domestic agenda. Now, you may be getting the impression that Bolesław was able to just live as he pleased, building up the Polish countryside, constructing monasteries, staying on great terms with the church, and interfering in the foreign affairs of different nations. Some would say an idyllic life for a ruler of the time. Well, that would be very, very incorrect. You see, Bolesław had some issues with his nobles. There isn't a ton of detail about the circumstances of the Nobles' discontent. From what we can tell, there are a few potential theories. The first is that these nobles were not happy with the different alliances that Bolesław was setting up with foreign powers. To understand why, in general during this time period in Europe, nobles didn't just stick to their countries in the traditional sense, but instead spent time getting to know neighbors in surrounding areas. As such, just because a noble has a sworn allegiance to the King of Poland didn't mean he was happy about the war with the Holy Roman Empire. After all, if you were on the border with Pomeranian pagans and were being called away to fight in the west against the Germans, you may not be thrilled that you have to leave your lands undefended. Another possibility could be about Bolesław's assertion of authority. After the pagan reaction, many noble families and leaders had gotten used to running things their own way. Now, they had someone with way more sway over domestic life interfering in their tax collection, building projects, and how they oversaw their military forces. If you were used to being on your own and then had to deal with this new layer of management, you may get upset with that change in status. Speaking of which, if that theme of nobles getting upset with Polish overlords intervening in their day-to-day affairs sounds familiar, you're catching on. It's a big theme during this time in Poland. The nobles didn't appear to actively revolt against Bolesław, at least not in the same way that the nobles in the Holy Roman Empire revolted against the emperor, but neither were they especially in support of his various projects and undertakings. It was sort of like a silent hostility that just simmered underneath the surface for Bolesław's entire reign. Anyway, you may be thinking that even in spite of these issues with nobles, Bolesław still had his great relationship with the Pope to lean back on, right? Right? No, well, not really. While the two of these were nominally allies and Bolesław was coronated under the authority of the Pope, there were definitely issues. First, there was the issue of the Pope being in Italy and Bolesław being in Poland. Now, that distance doesn't seem like a big deal today, but at the time it would mean that if Bolesław had an issue with somebody, he couldn't really go to the Pope to ask for, him to wield his influence on a day-to-day disagreement. The second reason is that Bolesław was not especially devout, apparently, meaning that even if he had been closer to the Pope, there's no guarantee the Pope would have actually been on his side. Finally, one of the Pope's chief representatives in Poland was not a big fan of Bolesław's. Which brings us to the pivotal moment of Bolesław's life, his falling out with Bishop Stanislaus of Krakow. Stanislaus was born in Poland in the year 1030, meaning that he had grown up during the reign of Casimir the Restorer and was a witness to many of the struggles that had plagued the nascent Polish state. For reasons unknown to us, Stanislaus appeared to be destined for an ecclesiastical role, studying in Gniezno and, according to one source, in Paris, before eventually becoming pastor in a small town just outside Krakow. Over the years, he rose in the ranks until becoming Bishop of Krakow in the year 1072, after Bolesław had become the Duke of Poland, but shortly before Bolesław would be crowned King of Poland, so right in there in that time period. Sadly, there's not a lot else we know about the early life of Stanislaus. While Stanislaus and Bolesław were ostensibly on the same side, what with Bolesław being allied with the Pope and Stanislaus being appointed to his office by the Pope, the two did not really get along. The details of the dispute aren't crystal clear. There are two acceptable descriptions of the dispute, and I'll share them both with you. You decide which one you like more. The first option is best described by the 1913 Catholic Encyclopedia, which I have edited for clarity. Quote, Bolesław II had become King of Poland, and the renown he had gained by his successful wars was now sullied by atrocious cruelty and unbridled lust. Moreover, Bishop Stanislaus had several serious disputes with the king about a piece of land belonging to the church which was unjustly claimed by Bolesław, and about some nobles who had left their homes to ward off various evils threatening their families, and who were in consequence cruelly treated by the king. Stanislaus spared neither tears nor prayers and admonitions to bring the king to lead a more Christian life. All being in vain, Bolesław was excommunicated, and the canons of the cathedral were instructed to discontinue the divine offices in case the king should attempt to enter. End quote. So, in this telling, Bolesław had made some mistakes regarding land allocation, had angered some nobles, and in response, Stanislaus excommunicated him until things were rectified. So that's the first option. The second option is that Bolesław may have been having an affair, or many affairs, depending on which sources you believe, and word got to Stanislaus that the king was not being faithful to his wife. Stanislaus subsequently excommunicated the king at the instigation of some nobles, and the two were firmly at odds. Whichever option you choose to believe, or if you believe a little of both, there are a couple of big questions. Did Stanislaus act alone? Were the nobles involved in the excommunication? Are the rumors of Bolesław's brother's involvement true? What did the king know, and when did he know it? We don't have firm answers to these questions. We do, though, have a very clear picture of what happened next. Bolesław ordered his followers to murder Stanislaus without even the pretense of a trial. Then, Bolesław's followers refused to murder Stanislaus without even the pretense of a trial. Awkward. In a fit of rage, Bolesław then went after Stanislaus and killed him, reportedly in the middle of a church service, following which Bolesław's men hacked the body to pieces to ostensibly ensure the bishop was really dead. He was. While Bolesław may have thought getting rid of the bishop would solve his problems, the opposite turned out to be true. You see, Stanislaus was not unpopular enough to enable somebody to just get away with murdering him. It's one thing if you murder someone unpopular, another if it's someone that's, mildly inoffensive, and another thing entirely if the person is well-liked. Stanislaus was apparently well-liked. He appears to have been popular with his congregation, with the nobles, and with the people of Poland at large. So, the people were not rejoicing at his death, but instead very angry that their king had just murdered their bishop. As a result, Bolesław had to flee for his life. Stanislaus, meanwhile, would go on to be canonized as Saint Stanislaus. And sadly, there's just no such happy ending for Bolesław. After fleeing to Hungary, we have some details of the reception that awaited him, courtesy of our friendly neighborhood chronicler, Gallus Anonymous. According to Gallus, quote, there is one incident that must be set down to Bolesław's vanity, which detracted much from his former decency. King Ladislas of Hungary in all humility made haste to meet Bolesław, and when he saw him coming in the distance, out of respect he got off his horse and waited for him. But Bolesław showed no regard to the mild king's humility, and lifted up his heart in the bane of boastfulness. He was my foster child, Bolesław said. I raised him in Poland, I installed him as king of Hungary. It is not fit that I should do him honor as an equal. I can kiss him from on horseback as I would any other of the princes. When Ladislaus noted that he was somewhat put out and turned aside from the road, still he gave instructions that fully honorable hospitality should be offered him throughout the land. Later they were reconciled and would meet each other on friendly terms like brothers. However, the Hungarians took all this deeply to heart." End quote. In simpler terms, Bolesław showed up in Hungary on the run from his fellow countrymen. King Ladislaus of Hungary offered him asylum, and, in return, Bolesław insulted him by insisting that, despite no longer having a kingdom, he still outranked the Hungarian king. What happens to Bolesław after this is a bit of a mystery. There are two competing stories, and again, I'll let you decide which one makes the most sense. The first is that as a result of Bolesław's mistreatment of their king, some Hungarian nobles decided to assassinate Bolesław. They then assassinated Bolesław in Hungary, and we don't know what happened. The second is a bit stranger and harder to believe than that first option, which is odd because that first one is really vague and scant on details, but, I'll tell it to you anyway. Apparently, some people believe that Bolesław, after going to Hungary, headed to Rome to ask forgiveness of the Pope, presumably reminding him that he had helped out during the investiture controversy. In response, the Pope ordered him to wander around in an act of repentance, not saying a word to anyone. Eventually, Bolesław, during his wandering around, reached an abbey in Carinthia, in southern Austria near the border with modern-day Slovenia, where he died. Again, this is hard to believe, but there is actually a tomb in the abbey with Bolesław's name on it, with bones inside, and with the armor of an 11th century Polish knight. So who can say? Anyway, those are the two options. Take whichever one makes you feel good. While Bolesław was off either wandering around mute or being assassinated in Hungary, things were not quiet on the home front. Almost immediately after getting kicked out of Poland, Bolesław's brother, Władysław, became Duke of Poland and took up the mantle of reigning over the Polish state. It is with Władysław that we will pick up next week. But what of Bolesław? What of his legacy? As we have seen, he was a very strong ruler that had the influence and the means to interfere with the affairs of the empire, the papacy, Hungary, Bohemia, Russia, and do it all while tamping down unrest at home. That's an actual achievement. He was clearly very active and had an idea that he was working towards. However, he was also apparently not the most popular guy, and eventually was run out of the country he had tried so hard to build up. In terms of a grade, I'd say that Bolesław passes Polish Rulers 101, but just barely. Before we finish though, I'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone that has been chipping into the Patreon page, even while we've been on this unannounced and unexpected hiatus for the last few weeks. We're getting ever closer to our first goal, which will result in the release of our first miniseries. If you'd like to get in on the action, feel free to visit patreon.com/historyofpolandpodcast to see what all the fuss is about. Until next time.